Hello and welcome to the Global Innovators in Business series. In this series, we interview leaders and innovators from different fields to share their experiences and advice with undergraduate students to provide inspiration and motivation. Today we have with us Malaika Judd. Malaika is the co-founder and CRIO, the Chief Investment Relations Officer at Sendy. And tell us a little bit more about Sendy.
Sure. So Sendy is a fulfillment and tech platform. So we say that because we started 8 years ago and we wanted to be tech only, but we built in a developing market where you have to be very operational. So what we do is we build end-to-end technology to help businesses fulfill their goods to consumers, retailers, businesses, etc. We primarily set up 8 years ago thinking we were going to do e-commerce. We thought we were going to be the shipbop for Africa. Turns out e-commerce has been a lot slower to grow over the last 8 years than we expected. And that there are so many other problems in traditional modern trade. Modern trade being the part of the market that's still working with massive retailers. So if you look at how a market is divided, you have modern trade, which is FMCGs, importers, distributors who sell to big supermarkets. Then you have general trade, which is 70% of the market, and that is FMCGs who sell to the people on the side of the road or the more informal outlets. And then you have e-commerce. Sendy does fulfillment for modern trade and e-commerce. And what that means is we help these businesses store their goods, manage inventory, pick, pack, fulfill orders, deliver orders, process payments. And then through that whole process, we even give them access to inventory loans, invoice financing, partner financing, etc. So we are supporting, we're behind the scenes. We are supporting businesses and making it easier for them to trade and to fulfill their goods. The ultimate goal, if you look at the cost of goods on the shelf in Kenya or in Africa, really, products that are made here, manufactured here, are more expensive on the shelf in a Kenyan supermarket than they might be, say, in the UK. And the reason that they're so expensive here is because local fulfillment, the transportation, the warehousing, that process is more expensive than actually exporting it and getting onto a supermarket shelf in London. And so the frustrating part is that you have a developing market who's paying more for locally produced products than a developed market is paying for those same products imported. So our goal is if we can reduce the cost of fulfillment, right? Reduce that warehousing, picking, packing, delivery, payment processing, etc. We can reduce the cost of goods on the shelf in the local market.
I see. Wow. So much unpack there. Right now, if I was a local business person, I wanted to create an online presence, and I wanted to sell to a spread of audience members inside Africa, how would I do that?
So, yeah. If you were, say, what we classify as social commerce. Social commerce is huge, actually. It's growing like 10 times faster than e-commerce. Social commerce is I make shea butter, or I make locally produced face masks, or I make honey, or I have a farm, and my farm, like the side hustle is, we produce fish or whatnot. It might not be your primary job. One of the things in Africa is everyone has a side hustle, right? So you have your full-time job that gives you the steady income, and then you're very entrepreneurial. You have a side hustle. You want to sell your stuff online. And so you typically sell through Facebook, WhatsApp, Instagram. So those are your first go-to channels for sales. What happens pre-Sendy, if Sendy didn't exist, is you post photos on Instagram, you get some following, you start with a network of friends, maybe you go to a little market on a weekend and people find your Instagram page from that, and then they follow you, and every time they want shea butter, every time they want honey, they find you on Instagram, they send you a message, you say, yes, I have it, they tell you where they live, they ask if you can deliver to their house, when you get back from work, you package that honey because you're still working a full-time job. And then you call your driver, like your boda guy, the motorcycle driver on the side of the road that you trust. And you give him the package and he delivers it. And so you have your honey, which you've just sold for 1,000 shillings, which might be worth $8, or something. Then you have the delivery fee that you're paying this motorcycle taxi. And that might be worth $3, $4. So right there you have a problem. $4 on $8. So obviously you can't eat that margin.
Yeah.
That's 50%. So you can't eat that. So you have to charge your customer. But that's another problem because your customer really wants that honey at $8, doesn't really want to pay $12 for it. So there's a barrier to growth there as a small business because that cost of fulfillment adds an additional 50% on top of the actual cost of the good. And so what we find is it's working, but it's hard for these businesses to grow, right? Like they can only grow to either the richest part of the market who's willing to pay that extra delivery cost, or they grow to just their small circle of friends who like them and trust know them very well. And if it's fine, it's my friend, I'll buy their honey. But if you actually want to scale that, you need to be more competitive on pricing, which means maybe that $8 price point is okay for multiple buckets of honey, but the $4 delivery fee is not. So there's a couple challenges there that I haven't touched on. So one is your cost to deliver that is too expensive. And the reason it's expensive is because you live on one part of Nairobi and they live on the other part of Nairobi. And that actually might be with traffic and a designated driver, that might still take half an hour. On a motorcycle, if that was in a car, it might take an hour. And so $4 for an hour is actually not a lot, but you're traversing a big metropolitan city.
Yeah.
On top of that, you have to deal with how is your customer going to pay you, right? Are they going to pay you upfront on M-Pesa? Are they going to wait till that driver delivers? Are they going to pay you in cash? We still operate in very much a cash economy. And if it's not cash, it is M-Pesa. But if it is M-Pesa, it's pay on delivery. They don't really want to pay upfront. They want you to deliver that good, make sure that they have it before they pay. Now we have a second challenge, which is who are we trusting to process that payment? So now you're relying on your driver or this independent motorcycle taxi guy to make sure that he doesn't just hand over the honey, that he actually is responsible for collecting payment. So there's a lot of trust that trust is an issue in this ecosystem. Now we have another problem. Maybe you sell multiple types of honey or multiple types of shea butter, and you have all these pictures on Instagram, and the person messages you and you say, oh, sorry, that one's out of stock. And so they say, okay, do you have this? And then you say, sorry, that one's out of stock, right? And so what you don't have is actual inventory or actual website with connected to inventory saying what's in stock, what's out of stock. So it's the transaction happens, but it's not easy or painless. There's multiple inefficiencies there. Now enter Sending. So in this situation, where Sending would help you is one thing we would do is we would give you a white labeled e-commerce site that allows you, that connects to your inventory. So first thing happens is all of your honey moves into our warehouse. And we upload it all and we tag it all by different product SKUs and we give you real-time inventory. So you know exactly how much you have in stock of every single different product SKU. Yeah. Second thing we do is we load that inventory onto a white labeled e-commerce site. So now you have a link that you can put your store logo, etc. And anytime someone reaches out on Instagram and says, hey, I'm interested in buying something, you send them a link. That link gives them sort of a checkout page or a white e-commerce page where they can see the different products. They see the photos, they see the amount, they see what you have in stock. From there, they can make a checkout cart. From that checkout cart, they will be prompted also to input delivery address information, etc. When they check out, they can still choose pay on delivery. Yeah. Sending will do fulfillment within 24 hours. We will collect that payment on delivery, and the cost of delivery won't cost 400 shilling. Ultimately, because I'm not sending one motorcycle taxi with one product. That order goes out the next morning with 20 other products or 30 other products to one driver. So he goes out for the day, and ultimately I can get that delivery down as cheap as 50 shillings, which is say 50 cents. So if you think about your ability to scale, when you had to charge your customer $4 and now you get to charge your customer 50 cents to get that same exact product delivered. I've processed the payment for you. I've provided an e-commerce site. I've linked it to inventory so that there's no back and forth about what you have in stock. And I've done the picking and the packing, and I've done the delivery. So now all of that can be handled while you're still at work. So you can have that side hustle where you're selling something that you make on the weekend, and you can run it seamlessly while you are busy doing something else. That is on the social commerce side. If you are a large manufacturer, it's not your side hustle, it's your full business. And then, but it's the same thing. I take all of your inventory. You're making drinks, you're making, again, makeup products, you're making paper towels, you're making stationery, books, iPhone cases, whatever you're making. You make it, it moves to our warehouse. We upload it. It's all on inventory, etc. It works the same exact way. Whether you're a small social commerce seller or you're a like multinational manufacturer that delivers to Carrefour and Quick Mart and all the big retailers.
It's so interesting that it's very unique from the perspective of an individual business seller and seeing like how that process is currently filled with like inefficiencies and potentials to improve. Is there a growing market for, and this is more like an industry question, is there a growing market for like small businesses and small like side hustles in the entire economy? Is that
I don't know if I can speak to all of Africa, but definitely in Kenya or Nigeria or some of the countries we operate, you're not a proper citizen if you only run one job, right? Like literally everyone has a side hustle. The foreigners in the country, because they're the ones who don't have a side hustle, right? I'm the one who doesn't have a side hustle. I work full time for Sunday. But everyone else at SEDB has another business, has another like level of income. And I think it's just deeply rooted in like tough times and knowing that you need to do whatever you can to be self-sustainable, to cover your own costs, not counting on government, and so it's just this cultural thing that you should diversify your risk and run your own business as well as work for a company, et cetera, et cetera. Super common. And I think like what we see now is that people are realizing that a side hustle can also be a full-fledged business. It doesn't have to be just a side hustle that can grow. And so a lot more people are dreaming that I do this as a side hustle now, and when it gets to a certain scale, it becomes my full thing.
And talking about scale, I think scaling for these small businesses is so important, but also for a logistics company, scale is like crucial, especially in the beginning years of Sendy. I think like having that ability to have multiple orders at the same time to be able to like leverage the efficiencies of one driver to multiple delivery sites. How did you get the critical mass from the beginning, and how did you like build that?
There's a question is what is critical mass? Yeah. Sendy's still very much in startup mode, right? We're not yet at the level of profitability or whatnot that we want to be at. Yeah, it's a tough question. One of the things that it's really tough is I think for a business like Sendy, it is a business that starts as a tech VC funded thing, right? At the beginning, it is really hard to provide cost savings and be profitable, right? Because it does cost $4 when you're doing one driver, one delivery. But I want to offer this cheaper so that I can get 20 deliveries per driver. So at some point in the very beginning, you are subsidizing it, right? One of the big things that we did over the last 8 years is we started out as A to B delivery. We started out as like a Uber for deliveries. Yeah. And so our first goal was like, just make the drivers more efficient. Everywhere you go on the side of the road, people with motorcycles just sitting there waiting for someone to walk by and ask for a ride. Yeah. Or waiting for a call to do a delivery. And they're everywhere. And so no one is at full capacity, right? Maybe during rush hour, they're busy, but then between 10 and 12, they're taking a nap. And so the first thing is there's too many assets on the road and they're not being well utilized. So our first goal was like, make the driver more efficient, because if he's more efficient, he will get more business in the day, which means that actually every single ride he does can be a little bit cheaper. Right now, the reason it's so expensive is I'm only doing 3 deliveries in a day, and I have to cover my vehicle cost and I have to cover my hours. And so for 3 deliveries to cover, it cost me $5 a day to rent my vehicle or to lease my vehicle. And then I, as a driver, want to make minimum $5 a day or more as a salary, and I need to cover my fuel. So if I'm only doing 3 deliveries, that's why I could charge so much. So first problem we tried to solve was like, just make the vehicles on the road more efficient, because then they'll be willing to do it for less per ride. The second thing we wanted to do was make every delivery more efficient. And what that means is, so first you take a driver who's doing 3 deliveries a day and you get him to doing 6 or 7 deliveries a day. Then you're like, okay, I want to go beyond 7 deliveries a day. How do I do that? And that means that it's not just A to B. Yeah. And so you go in the direction of pooling orders. And so like I do a pickup, I do another pickup, I do a drop off, I do a pickup, I do 2 more drop offs, etc. So you start, again, you think of like Uber Pool, where you share a cab with someone else. You can do the same thing on the delivery side, right? Because actually 90% of the time, what we found is the delivery's not urgent. 90% of the time, if you do it within the next couple hours, I'm happy. Even if you do it in today, I'm happy. And so if you allow the customer to choose between this is urgent, I'll pay for express, I'll pay that $4 for express, versus this is do it same day, I'm happy. The customer gets a massive cost saving. You can cut it down in half. And you allow the driver to be more efficient with their route. They're not doing A to B, like they can actually pick a route. We can optimize it in such a way that it's more efficient. So there we went from 3 deliveries a day to 8 deliveries a day, and now we get to 10, 12, etc. Yeah. So if we think about the history of Sendy, that's how we worked. First, it was just make the drivers more efficient. Then it was like start pooling orders or aggregating orders virtually. A couple of years ago, I'd say 2.5 years ago, we felt, okay, we're aggregating them virtually, but like this still doesn't feel efficient enough. Like we still feel like there could be more cost savings. And so that's actually what moved us into this idea. We actually have to have consolidation centers. So 4 years ago, we started with these like micro hubs where we actually took the back of a truck, caravans, and we placed them around the city. And those become like little micro hubs where you can drop a package, pick up 4 more packages, etc. And then 2 years ago, we said, okay, we have enough scale now. Screw the micro hubs. Let's put it in a massive warehouse. And when you do the massive warehouse, the big thing that changes is actually now you can provide storage for your customers. The benefit of providing storage for your customers is it means that I don't even have to do all those pickups. Like I get rid of half of the like actual stops that a driver has to do in a day because all of those pickups are now happening from one consolidated warehouse. And I'm still servicing all the same customers, but because I hold all of their goods and I pack all their goods overnight, a driver just shows up in the morning, picks up 40 packages and goes out for the day. Funny enough, throughout this whole process, with the extra levels of consolidation, what it did is it allowed us to provide the whole warehousing piece for free to the customers. So I've gotten the customer down from $4 to, say, average $1 per delivery. And I'm providing storage, warehousing, and picking and packing all as part of that $1. So like from a customer standpoint, maybe if the honey was just in your kitchen or whatever, it's not a big deal. As you get bigger and bigger, you start actually having storage area, warehousing area, etc. That's like rent that you pay for. And then you have the people in your warehouse that you pay for that pick and pack your orders, that process the purchase orders, who like deal with the trucks, etc. And so if I can take all of that over for free, basically, and I reduce your delivery costs, we see that for some of our customers, we save them as much as 75% on cost of fulfillment. So it's massive.
That is so interesting. Okay. I think the next question on that is, you mentioned there's like at least 2 major pivots, and then the first initial idea and 2 major pivots. How do you go from one pivot to the other? What is the decision process, and what makes you like take the leap from one idea to like realizing that it needs to change with?
Yeah. I'm going to correct you there. So I would call those things pivots. I'd call them like evolution or upscaling or action. Don't be like, we have made pivots. There's a whole bunch of other things Sendy has done that I haven't even talked about. Like at some point we added taxis to the platform and then we shut down that down 3 months later. We have added certain countries and we've closed those. So we have made pivot 100%. But what I've talked about here is like the evolution of consolidation. And the reason I want to say it's not a pivot is because the technology that we built to track or dispatch orders when we were doing A to B is the same technology that we built on top of to do virtual consolidation, which is the same technology that we added an additional layer to do consolidation through micro hubs, which is the same technology, again, that we're using to do inventory management, warehouse picking, packing, dispatching. So the journey that I've walked you through have not been pivots. There have been pivots. I'll just not talk about that. But it's just this path of how do I provide more value add to my customers? What is the next logical level of development or sophistication for this platform? How can I continue to get the cost down? Right? How do I become more competitive in this time that Sendy's been on this journey? Today, this piece about doing A to B is no longer like novel, right? One is you see companies like Uber doing it, but two, it's actually in Kenya, other companies who are doing like on-demand delivery with technology. And so there's also this like, how do I become more competitive and provide more advantage and like more comprehensive for my customer than those new players that have come into the market? So it's also just like being very customer focused, being very price focused, being very like technology first. What else can we do? We're not just trying to be a logistics company. We're a tech company first. It just happens to be in logistics. And like my background is all in economics. And people always ask me like, how did you end up in logistics? And I'm like, no, it's all about efficiency, right? Like the way I look at it is like, how can I do more with less? Like it's a math problem, right? How can I optimize these dispatching even better to get the cost down? And so like that problem that we set out to do 8 years ago is still exactly the same problem we're trying to solve today.
So tell us a little about what started in the earlier parts of your journey. So you studied economics at Penn?
Yep. So I did undergrad, I did international relations and economics. I actually thought I was going to go work for an NGO or think tank at Save the World, End World Hunger, and whatnot. Ended up, after I graduated, it was the financial crisis, the 2008 financial crisis. So everyone who had a job right out of Penn lost their job that summer. Ended up going to France and did work for an NGO, wanted to learn French. Then went back and did a master's in competition policy. Did a master's in economics and then did another master's in competition policy. I used like the downturn of the market to just overeducate myself. Went into the corporate world, worked for TomTom. TomTom is traffic, map, fleet navigation, automotive, transport. That's what sort of got me into the like automotive, transport, mapping, logistics space. Had a crisis, identity crisis. Am I millennial? I don't know. But like where we feel like we need more impact. I thought my life was too easy. I was living in Amsterdam. Thought my life was too easy. And remembered that like back when I did my undergrad at Penn, I had thought I was going to save the world. And so said I need to do something with more impact and I took a job in Kenya at an automotive startup and we were going to build the first African car. So I sold all my stuff. I moved to Kenya. I arrived within 24 hours. I realized I made the worst mistake ever. And I had not done my due diligence. But I was here. I was in Kenya. I was up for the adventure. Ended up leaving the company that I'd moved here to. Only worked there for 3 months. But I got a job. At the time, the ecosystem was very small. This was 10 years ago. I got a job working for a local investment fund. And my job was to do deal sourcing across Africa. At that time, deal sourcing across Africa really meant like Kenya, Uganda, South Africa, Nigeria, maybe Ghana, right? Like it hadn't really expanded into Francophone region. It hadn't really expanded into the North African region. And so I had the benefit of touring those countries and looking for entrepreneurs and helping grow that ecosystem. And in that process, I met my co-founders at Sendy. And my biggest frustration at that time was like how to work with this informal market. I can't stand traffic, and most of these countries are full of traffic. And so I always took bodas, motorcycle taxis, and like negotiating with them is like one massive headache because their prices are like $1 or $5 for the same exact delivery. And the other thing is that at that time there wasn't as many on the road. And so what you did is like you had it in your phone, like Boda George Junction or Boda George, like Samuel Yaya. Like you put in your phone Boda so you could find them, like their name, and then where they normally sit, because everyone has a corner of a road, yeah? And so ultimately, if you're like traversing the city, you need the Boda that's like at the corner of the road close to you. And so you start building a whole phone book of these service providers, because at that time there was no like aggregated app that puts everyone on one platform. And so this was a huge, massive pain point for me that I had 100 different motorcycle taxis in my phone. And then even when you called them, they're like, yeah, I'm coming. And you sat there for 20 minutes. They were actually on the other side of the city. So that was my own personal frustration, was like, how do you deal with this informal market? Technically, the vehicles are there. The drivers are there. the pricing is unclear. You don't actually know where the vehicles are at any given time. And like the whole process is inefficient and painful. But you don't need to go build a taxi company, right? There are people already doing it. Things operate, people move, taxis are provided. And so my idea was more on the personal side, like how do I move myself better? Whereas my co-founders were already thinking about this idea on the package side. And the reason they were thinking about it on the package side is like the three of them together, so we're four of us as co-founders, the three of them together had actually done something, a package delivery platform for an inner city bus company. So 10 years ago, majority of packages moved on the buses. This is like the stereotypical African image, right? Like you see a bus with a lot of people, more people than seats, and potentially some chickens or something. And then on top of the bus, like an overflowing bus of suitcases and bags and wheat and whatever strapped onto the bus, and also underneath. These bus companies make more money in moving goods than they do in moving people. And so we all think about them as like passenger vehicles, but actually they're moving goods. My co-founders had built a parcel tracking system for the inner city bus companies and had sold it, and we're already dabbling in that space. And we're trying to think like, how do we do this more for not necessarily on top of the bus companies, because they're also very corrupt and a bit messy and whatnot, but make it easier for just individuals to actually get it directly from door to door. Because the other problem with the bus companies is like you have to go into town. Right? So you go into town to drop off your package, and then it gets to Mombasa, and whoever you were sending that package to, they have to come into town to pick it up. So it was like painful on both sides. And so they were dabbling with this idea of like, how do we actually go direct from person to person? Remember, we are operating in an environment where there are no post boxes, right? There's no mailbox, and there's no street addresses, right? Like 50% of the time, your street address is I'm on this road, I'm next to this bank, I'm the black gate next to the bank. Once you get into the black gate, go down the hill, look for the red house, and I'm behind the red house. That is your address. So like this whole idea of moving goods doesn't sound so complex when you're thinking about the developed world where everyone has an address. You put that in the developing market, and like you can't write that on an envelope. And even if you did write it on an envelope, there's no postal system that will actually move that. Officially, these countries have postal systems, but like the systems are used for like government documents or like maybe banking documents. And so you'll use it like once or twice in your life, which means that no one actually has a post box. So if you ask anyone at Sendy what their post box is, they will give Sendy's post box. So Sendy as a company has a box which is in town. We have one key for it. And everyone on in this company, whoever has to give a post box to like their bank or something, puts Sendy's post box number. And so like once a month, we send someone to this post box and we get like a pile of stuff, and then we hand it out and we're like, oh, it looks like your checkbook arrived, right? It's like totally bogus. So e-commerce can't rely on that system, right? General trade can't rely on that system. And so you don't have addressing, you don't have post boxes, you don't have a national postal system that is delivering on a daily basis to your house. So how do you use this informal market of all of these guys and all of these vehicles to actually build a postal system without trying to go to the government and be like, hey, government, you should actually build a national postal system?
So
I went on a tangent.
No, something like it's a wisdom there, and to understand like the context that you're working in and the different challenges of just the street address and like welcoming people at like it's so fascinating. For you, you were saying that when you were younger, you wanted to do something that was impactful. Like
I've become a capitalist. So this whole process, what I've realized for me personally is that like you can still have massive impact. You can still make change. You can still solve like fundamentally broken system. You don't need to do it like the NGO route. You don't need to do it the nonprofit route. You don't need to like do it through government organizations, whatever. You can be like very business mindset and go and find that problem. And there's probably a very functioning business solution that will solve that problem. And actually, I'd say that like I'm probably more pro do it the business way than do it the NGO way, because this way you're forced to find a way to keep it profitable, right? Make it sustainable. Like at some point it will work on its own. right? Like you don't need to keep pumping money into it. And my mindset has changed. I think like the ultimate goal is still the same, which is like, how do we find innovative solutions? There's so much technology out there. There's so many like creative ways to solve problems. How do we solve some of the problems of developing markets and even like leapfrog how other markets did it? The perfect example in this market is like how people go from not being online to like having a smartphone and having email. And so they go from like totally off the grid to smartphone, Gmail, TikTok, right? It's just, whereas if you look at how I did it in the US, it's like you're totally off the grid to having a big hard computer and like a modem and like dial in. And then it's like there's multiple stages to getting to that smartphone. Whereas here it's just, no, I live in a village nowhere. And now I'm like on TikTok, right? So you can leapfrog with technology. And so actually one of the questions is a postal system even necessary, right? Like a traditional like mailbox is even necessary, because now there's all this technology to like non-deliver to an address, but to deliver to a person. If you think about it today, I don't want my package to go to my mailbox. If you're going to deliver it in the next hour, can you deliver it to me like at work? It also allows you to take all of these modern solutions and not just follow the traditional path of other countries or how we've done it historically, but like actually bring something that might be massively behind up to where everyone else is really fast. So that's what I like, the idea of using technology and building sustainable businesses to solve massive problems faster and more efficiently than if you look at the history of how we've solved it in the past elsewhere in the world. Yeah, go
Do
ahead.
you think in developing countries, there's definitely more inefficiencies that you can address? Would you recommend students to like try to like explore those inefficiencies more and bring solutions from developed countries to developing countries? Or is there another solution of continuing to like push the 0.01% in like the developed country, and then once that is like more developed, like have that tech, which is like incrementally more efficient as to help the entire economy grow?
So I'm not sure I totally understand the question, but one thing I want to talk about is Kenya is like one of the founding fathers of mobile money, and like mobile money is super, super convenient and efficient. And in some sense, like it's a technology like the rest of the world. Yes, I know we have Apple Pay, but like credit cards have their own challenges, right? It's a technology that the rest of the world can borrow from. So there's also like benefits of sometimes solving problems in developed markets totally different than how you've seen it elsewhere. Sorry, in developing markets, totally different than how you've seen it elsewhere. And then being like, wow, that works really well. We should expand this to the rest of the world, like the world. So one thing is that like you don't have to borrow technology from developed worlds, right? You can actually come up with creative solutions and it can go the other way. The second thing is there are so many broken things in this environment that like one of my personal identity crises or like challenges is like I've been successful as an entrepreneur in this environment. And I always question like, could I go do that back in the US or could I go do that in Europe? And part of me says, yes, I can. I've solved all these amazing problems in Kenya. I have a proven track record. I'm amazing. And then on the other hand, I'm like, yes, but it's less competitive, or Kenya is less competitive, or the problems are so much bigger. The problems are so much more obvious, or right, there's just so much room for improvement that there's enough space to be an entrepreneur next to the next entrepreneur. Versus sometimes I say the Europe or US, like you're solving a problem that like everyone else has already solved. You're just adding like that micro extra feature on top. So the benefit of being an entrepreneur in this environment is it's like actually incredibly friendly, incredibly open and welcoming to everyone because there's so many problems. Everyone come. You take this, I'll take this, you take this, and let's all work together and solve this. So it's a very collaborative environment. There's many problems to solve. Everyone is on board to solve them. Everyone wants to work together, and you can have massive impact, right? You're not just making the next social media platform, right? I don't know how many more of those we need, right? You're actually reducing the cost of goods on the shelf by making fulfillment 70% cheaper, right? So yeah, my identity crisis is like, how would I have the same amount of impact? What problem would I have to solve in Europe or the US to have that amount of impact? That's the benefit of building in this environment.
I think that answer was perfect question I tried to ask,
Okay.
but yeah, exactly, like comparing those two and like how the impact like how it differs in these different scenarios. I What was the biggest challenge that you faced in the past few years?
I can't even count them. I can't even count how many challenges. I'll give you like challenges on 2 different scales, right? I've talked about not having addressing or like we want to solve a problem about consolidating orders. And you think you're going out to the market to solve that problem, but then you also have to address every location you go to. So that's a micro problem you didn't, or like a massive problem that you didn't think you were going to have to solve. And then you realize that actually 10 years ago, every driver didn't have a smartphone. So now you're educating them on a smartphone. You're actually getting them, you have to finance the asset for them to have a smartphone. So now there's another problem, which is they don't have smartphones. And then there's a third problem, which is like they've never interacted with a map before. Right. So now you're teaching them what like north, south, east, west is. And then you're teaching them how to use navigation. Right. And so like you think you're trying to solve consolidation of packages, but you're actually solving smartphone penetration and how to read a map and addressing and education on navigation. And also I need you to speak in English because you're dealing with lots of business people, right? You can't speak Swahili. And I need to teach some customer service basically because you can't be rude and say those things. And so you're solving so many other problems in the process that would be the disadvantage of this market, which is you don't have the benefit of going out to solve one problem. You actually have to solve like an ecosystem of problems at the same time. So that's been like an ongoing challenge for us as Sandy. But if I go on the other spectrum of challenges, you're trying to fundraise in a market that has, I don't know, 5 years ago or 6 years ago, it was like that Africa as a continent had raised like $500 million on startups, right? I think today, or I think in 2022, it was like 2 billion or something. But like 2 billion, like what does San Francisco raise that in a day? So like the other problem is like you're building an entire ecosystem, like for the continent, right? Like you become, so on our cap table, we have about 45 government investors. About 50% of those investors are first-time Africa investors when they invested in us. So not only am I fundraising for Sandy, but I'm fundraising for Africa, right? I'm trying to convince, I'm going to San Francisco and I'm trying to convince a BC investor who's been doing it for 20 years that like they should actually consider looking at a whole nother continent, right? I'm building the logistics industry. I'm building the tech industry. I'm building like the fundraising for Africa industry. I'm bringing LPs to the continent, right? And the amount of times that like an LP has been like, hey, can you show up to this event and talk about what it's like to build a startup in Africa, right? So you become a pioneer, not just for fulfillment in Kenya, right? You become a pioneer for the whole idea of like entrepreneurship in Africa. Yeah. So like you carry a lot of responsibility for a whole bunch of things. I gotta address the country. I gotta educate the drivers. I gotta finance the vehicles. I gotta deliver the packages. I gotta teach entrepreneurship. And so again, the wonderful part about all of this is it is a great environment if you also don't want to be a specialist, if you like being a generalist, because you learn everything. You have to touch on everything, which is good for me.
And how do you manage all these different things? What is your schedule? How is your productivity hacks?
Yeah. So how do you do that? I think this is a problem for any entrepreneur in the world. I think like we have the worst work-life balance. I have a very vivid memory. So throughout this journey, I've actually gotten married and had 2 kids. And I have a memory of being on a surgical table in a hospital. And they're like, okay, I had a C-section. We need to cut your child out. And I was like, hold on. I need to do bank approvals. I was like literally on the table. And they're like, no, hold on. Like these bank approvals need to go out by 2:00 or people are not going to be paid. So like you have no work-life balance. Like you absolutely never stop. But how do you balance? I don't know. You give me the answer. I'm still looking for that. I think the thing that's been great about this environment, I touched on it before, is that it's a very collaborative environment. It's not so competitive right now because there's enough problems to solve. And there is not that much money and there's not that many entrepreneurs that like we have to work together. And so how I've managed it is that every entrepreneur in this ecosystem is my support system. So every time you think that your company is going to die or like you've just dealt with the Kenyan Revenue Authority telling you that you owe millions and millions of dollars of taxes and they're auditing you for 5 years in a row, you think it's the worst thing ever. You go to dinner with all the other entrepreneurs and then you hear their story and you're like, oh, my life's not so bad. And so it's just, I think my support system has been everyone else who's trying to solve problems, who's trying to build companies in Kenya or Africa, who are dealing with the same challenges. And they're all brilliant. They're all like super hardworking, super entrepreneurial, super well-educated, super focused on impact. Even if they also want to build $1 billion business and make a lot of money, it's still very impactful and very inspiring and a great support system.
Thank you. Gwen, do you have any questions?
Yeah. Okay. So how has the global economic environment affected Sendy? It's been horrible. So the first thing that happened is basically when interest rates go up, it changes how people view like their portfolio, their investment portfolio and risk and what they do with their money. And what I mentioned before is like 50% of our investors are first-time African investors. What that means is like they are not designated African investors. They haven't necessarily raised an investment fund to only invest in the region. And so when stuff happens globally, the first thing they do is pull back on the risky and what they consider like anything in developing markets, and for surely in developing markets that they are the most new to, they stop. And so in the last year, I'd say I want to say 50, like I want to say 75%, but like minimum 50% of the money has disappeared, maybe 75% of the money. And so if you talk to any entrepreneur right now, we're all hanging off a cliff because valuations drop in San Francisco, right? Like valuations are dropping 70% and there's no money. Now, like compound that problem in Africa and everything takes longer to break even in this continent because you're dealing with so many more challenges. It takes longer to reach scale because it's not Europe where like we're all on the euro and we can all operate in like you can cross borders or ship or do things without there being like actual borders, right? You can't expand across the continent the way that you expand across Europe. Every time you hit another country border, I mean, between Kenya and Uganda, there is a border, there's a currency change, there's a political change, there's a regulation change, there's expansion is really hard. And I think if you look at any of the startups in the last 10 years and you look at, we had aggressive expansion and then you look at the last year, every single company has pulled back because a couple of things have happened. We had that aggressive expansion because we needed to hit scale numbers like a US or European startup would hit. But it's not turning profitable as fast as we expected. And then all of the money dries up. And so what's happened is like all of these companies have pulled back to their home and said, okay, I need to get this sustainable first. But it like the last 12 months have been very difficult, both for Sandy and for the environment, for the whole ecosystem, because I want to say we didn't see it coming. Africa was doing well. Like the money year on year that was coming into the continent was more than doubling. The number of startups were more than doubling. So it was like growing. More investors were coming in. And then the pressure, the inflation, the interest rates have just, everyone has pulled back. And so what happens when all the money pulls back is that those that are African funds, you know, those that are African funds, technically they still have money pegged for the region, but they're not necessarily growth funds because this ecosystem is young. It's 10, 15 years max old. So they're like what we'd call like a Series B investor or maybe a Series C investor, but they're not like your SoftBanks or your Tiger Globals or whatnot that can give you hundreds of millions of dollars. And the expectation was that you didn't like that it was okay because the SoftBanks and the Tiger Globals would come. They would come. Like once this ecosystem gets big enough and these startups get big enough, those companies will come. So I can be an Africa investor with $100 million total portfolio, and I can write $10 million tickets, and it's going to be fine because I write $10 million tickets or $25 million tickets, and there's going to be another investor that comes in. But what's happened is all those other investors are global investors, and they've all stopped. So now the funds that are pegged for Africa that have a $100 million fund who can write $5 million tickets, they're freaking out because I can give you these $5 million, but who's going to come in after me? Like, you need $50 million to get to profitability, and I can't give you $50 million. I can give you $5 million. So yes, I have the money, but I'm scared to give it to you because there's no one else after me. And so the global investors have pulled out, and the local investors or the African pegged investors are freaking out and don't know how to write the tickets or are too scared to write the tickets because they don't know what will happen after them, after their money comes in. And so everything is on pause. It's a shitty environment, but we're surviving. What it's done is it's forced every single company to massively rethink how fast to get to profitability and massively rethink scale versus break even. And so Sendy and every other company I know in this environment has had to do this pivot from Sendy was in 4 markets. We were Kenya, Uganda, Nigeria, Cote d'Ivoire. And we've had to pause Cote d'Ivoire and Nigeria and really just focus on East Africa right now and be super cost and efficiency focused because we have now learned one of the massive disadvantages of building in a developing market is that it's the first place where money disappears.
That's so interesting. Sorry, go ahead. Go in second.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So I don't think I said there's a lack of female entrepreneurs in developing markets. Actually, one of the interesting things is that you find a better percentage here than you do elsewhere. I think that has to tie with values and impact. I think more females, and don't quote me on this, is just my interpretation. I think there's more of the females that go out to be entrepreneurs are focused on what is the impact of what they're building. And so as a result, you find a better skew of female male here than you do elsewhere in the world. What is the percentage elsewhere in the world? 20%? I don't know.
There.
Yeah.
Look
at this chart. Yeah, sorry. But so, yeah, I think that's tied to, it's the same thing in the development organizations. If you look at the NGOs or you look at hospitals, or there are so many more females in those roles because they're more impact focused that here in this entrepreneurial ecosystem, that the ratio is better than the global ratio. It's probably still not 50-50. That's true. But it's definitely better than the global ratio.
And how do you continue to build that?
Support that. Yeah. So I'm an interesting person because for some reason I like to focus on my failures more than my successes. And so I'm an interesting person because I get asked now more and more to talk at female entrepreneurship events or just general entrepreneurship events. And I feel this responsibility to pass on to all these other women who are out there building to not make the same mistakes that I made. And so you put me on stage and I'll just tell you every single mistake I've made. Right? I feel this, this is how I feel like I can contribute to the environment. This ecosystem which is I know you're disadvantaged because you're building in a developing market. You're disadvantaged because you might be Kenyan, and even just jumping on a plane to get to San Francisco and fundraise is a barrier. I mean, we've been building this company for 8 years, and my co-founder, our CEO, who is male but African, just 2 months ago got a visa to the US. It's taken us 8 years to be able to get him a visa to the US, right? I have this advantage that we need to fundraise. I'll get to New York tomorrow. So you're disadvantaged because you're building in a developing market. You're disadvantaged because of your passport. You're disadvantaged because you're female. You have all these disadvantages. So if the best thing I can do is shorten your path or reduce the number of mistakes you make, relative to the mistakes I've made. I enjoy sharing my laundry list of mistakes and like helping other female entrepreneurs not like just get there faster. So that's where a separate thing that I enjoy. I find it back.
On a similar topic, do you have any advice for our younger students who are like looking for a career in impact and like unsure of what to do, kind of like in the midst of this crisis of should they go into a job first, like coming out of graduation? How should that path be to like fully dedicate a portion of their life to pursue their passion to an impact?
Yeah. So it's interesting, right? I'm very American. I grew up in Princeton, right? My father was a professor at Princeton, went to Penn. I'm like a product of a uber competitive, uber label focused market, right? It's like, where'd you grow up? Where'd you go to university? What was your first job? Where do you live in the city? How much money do you make? This is the United States, right? And I'm incredibly competitive, right? I think most kids who do well are incredibly competitive. And so graduating during the financial crisis, getting a job, then losing that job, right? And then you feel like you've already failed. You're 22 years old and you've already failed at life because I didn't get that investment banking job, right? I didn't get that management consulting job and I came out of an Ivy League school, right? So it's just like this pressure that we put on ourselves to follow a very specific path, right? It's like the path is mapped out for you when you were a kid, right? You're like told that you need to be in extracurricular activities in high school and you need to be the president of the debate team and the captain of the field hockey team and and volunteer and get perfect SAT scores and do all this and then get into an Ivy League school and make sure you get a 3.5 or higher and then make sure you get management consulting. Or the tech ecosystem wasn't as huge back then, so it wasn't like going to tech. It was you either had to be an investment banker or be a management consultant. And then like you got to be a management consultant for one of the top 4 names, right? It's just, and then you have to do 2 or 3 years and you have to go back to business school. And then after business school, like the path is set out for you. And so for me, what was difficult is growing up in that environment, wanting to be part of that top 1 or 5%, knowing what that path looked like, and then potentially not making it, right? Not having that management consulting job. So what did I do? I ended up at a volunteer organization in a village in France, and then I ended up doing a master's and then another master's. And then I worked in Amsterdam at a corporate environment. And then I ended up in Africa. Like nothing happened the way it was supposed to happen at all. And now I've been doing this for 10 years. So I'm like the biggest advocate of you don't have to follow the path that we are told to follow. Like that competitive American environment built. I had an advantage because I grew up in a US environment, but my mother is Dutch and my dad's Canadian. And so they were constantly taking us around the world. My parents actually met in Kenya. My name, Malaika, is a Swahili name. It means angel in Swahili. So I had this advantage or disadvantage because I was like growing up in this American system as like the stereotypical American with these parents who were like, you don't have to do that, right? Why do you put pressure on yourself to do that? Think outside the box. I am like 100% all for not following that path. And I think like for me personally, one of the best things I did was take myself out of that environment. Like I put myself in this environment where it's less competitive and so much more collaborative and so much more like I still want to be amazing. Everyone else around me is still coming from brilliant schools. They're still like super ambitious people. They still want to have impact, but it's not let me climb over you to get to the top. It's actually like, I see the value of working with you. And I really, to me, that has been really helpful in my like own balance and own like self-confidence and peace. I would say that like my experience at Sendy or with Sendy has given me like an MBA over and over again, like through the highs and the lows, the expansion, the layoffs, the fundraising, everything. Like I've learned all of that. So I still learned, I still grew, I still achieved a lot, and I didn't have to do it the same way that everyone else did. So circling back to the question is, how do you advocate for going off to do things that are impact? And for me, it wasn't even like I must go off and do something that was impactful. It was like, what is intriguing? What is interesting? And how do I still grow and build something huge. And still, actually, when I decided to come to Africa, I said I wanted to be in a French-speaking country on the coast. So it was like, I could be in like Senegal or and I looked in French-speaking countries on the coast. But again, this was 10 years ago. And everything I found was like, come run an eco lodge. Right. And so then like I had this contrast between, okay, I want this beautiful work-life balance, but like running an eco lodge, does that really make sense for my career? And so I didn't end up in a French-speaking country on the coast. At that time, it was like the jobs that made sense were either in South Africa, Kenya, or Nigeria. Which is, now I think there's more options. Like you can go to Egypt, Cote d'Ivoire, etc. But so I made that balance between I want to do something different, right? Like I did apply to Peace Corps and then decided I didn't want to do Peace Corps. But okay, I'm business focused. I want to go to Africa. How do I balance all these things? And what brought me here was like actually to launch this car for this automotive startup. So you can find balance. You can find something that's like very still on your career path that has impact, that might be in a different country or outside of the traditional path that we all follow I'm super happy. I have no regrets. Absolutely no regrets about any decision I made. Even losing that job out of university, I'm thankful that all happened because it completely changed the trajectory of my life. And I think just being open to that, like even when you get laid off right now in this environment, all these people who are getting laid off, like this can be a blessing. Like it can completely change what you're going to do and open up so many other opportunities.
Thank you so much,
Welcome.
Malaika. This is such a fascinating interview. I don't know what to say. I've learned so much from you,
Okay.
and I'm sure the students are able to learn too. Yes. Thank you.